One of the universal constants, no matter the Navy, are bored and creative sailors. And when sailors get creative, they do interesting things. Many a story of wild shore leave parties exists for a very good reason. That said, there are also cases of sailors getting creative when at sea. USS Tucker is very much a case of this. After all, how many times can you name a modern destroyer rigging sails? And I'm not counting the Udachi myth here. This wasn't really a serious experiment, it must be noted. The story has varied over the years, but a common theme is the captain trying to stretch fuel. Sometimes throwing in the crew was bored as further justification. It certainly made for an interesting picture either way, but at the same time, it's also hidden away the interesting history of a fighting ship. Tucker was involved in the Pacific War from the start, engaging Japanese attackers at Pearl Harbor before leaving to support the war effort, where she would, admittedly, suffer one of the more unfortunate endings. Of course, none of this could have been expected when the ship began her service. Not the sails, not Pearl Harbor, and not her unfortunate end. Tucker was simply one of 18 Mahan-class destroyers. A trendsetter in American destroyer design, but Tucker hardly stuck out as special. Now for the brief design notes before we move on. Tucker displaced a bit over 1,500 tons at her standard displacement. One of the interwar 1,500 tonners, or gold platers, depending on who you ask. Regardless of what you called them, the Mahans reached around 2,100 tons at their full load, allowing the ships to carry 5 5-inch 38 caliber guns in 5 single mountings. A super-firing semi-enclosed pair on the bow, a third mount behind the 2 funnels, and an exposed super-firing pair on the stern, a layout that would become very familiar in American destroyers, although that amidships mount was generally removed during the war to fit more anti-aircraft guns. As for torpedoes, Tucker carried 12, in 3 quad mountings, one on the center line and one on either broadside, with weaponry rounded off by 4 50 caliber machine guns and depth charges on the stern. All of this was capable of a speedy 37 knots on 46,000 shaft horsepower through 2 shafts. Right, with this out of the way, let's talk service, which, as I noted, certainly didn't give any hint of how it would go at first. Tucker was laid down on August 15th, 1934, by the Norfolk Navy Yard. Her construction went pretty normally beyond this point, with the ship launched on February 26, 1936, and commissioned on July 23rd of the same year. She was named for one Captain Samuel Tucker, an officer of the Continental Navy and one of the first American naval officers, an auspicious name to say the least. That said, Tucker's initial service would be fairly quiet, as could be expected for entering service in the middle of 1936. There wasn't exactly a lot going on in the American Navy, so Tucker spent her time on training duty. In this, she operated with the battle fleet based out of San Diego. There shouldn't have been that much of note from mid-1936 through late 1941. Just the various fleet problems, the massive interwar naval exercises. However, it was during her training that Tucker had her most famous incident. In June 1940, Tucker joined other parts of the fleet in training off of Wake Island. All well and good, and nothing particularly special. but this was a long-term deployment of several days. While Tucker wasn't exactly short-ranged, the ship did have to worry about her fuel. It's here where the famous sails come into the picture, and where, as noted, the story varies a bit on which telling you're looking at. Riley in U.S. Navy destroyers cites that this was done to stretch the fuel supply. Tucker can make a blistering 3.4 knots on sails alone, just enough to maintain steering while she loitered on station. Sometimes you'll also see it claimed that this was done to return to Hawaii after running out of fuel, or that the sails were used on the return voyage to extend the ship's range. While that second one is technically true, in that it was done to extend range, it wasn't on the return trip. It also probably wasn't the sailors trying to relieve boredom, though this did probably help there. No, this idea seems to have come entirely from the captain, Lieutenant Commander Hyler Gearing, an experiment to stretch the fuel reserves, which by all accounts worked out well. After that exercise concluded, however, it was back to more typical work, at least for the rest of 1940. When 1941 rolled around, things would change a fair bit. First in February, when the destroyer went on a cruise across the Pacific, arriving in New Zealand to show the flag on March 17th. Then it was back to training with the odd refit through to December 1941, a pattern that would see Tucker moored in Pearl Harbor for an overhaul. A good portion of her machinery would be out of action on December 7th, 1941, as a direct result. That morning, Tucker wouldn't get underway during the Pearl Harbor attack. She was stuck by the destroyer tender Whitney along with 4 other destroyers. Not a great position to be stuck in, though the Japanese had bigger targets to focus on. That allowed Tucker's crew to spring into action as the first bombs began to explode in the harbor. One man in particular, Walter Bowe, manned a machine gun. He opened fire before the stunned command staff could even think to order general quarters. The after-action report cites Bowe's fire as the first shots by American forces inside Pearl Harbor. Obviously, Ward's mini-sub action outside the harbor was the first American fire that day. Regardless, a couple minutes after Bowe opened fire, the 5-inch guns joined in, along with the other destroyers around Tucker. This fire is commonly accepted as downing 2 Japanese attackers at bare minimum. The after-action report notes 3 or 4, though this isn't as commonly accepted. Either way, Tucker did quite a bit for a ship that wasn't able to move, with Bowe's fire noted as quite accurate, while the ship herself avoided any damage. As the Japanese attackers left, the harbor was a mess. Tucker's machinery was quickly brought back to working order to allow the ship to set sail. First, to keep a wary eye out for further attack. Then to join other destroyers on convoy escort duty. She would spend 5 months on the latter duty. Tucker escorted American shipping between the West Coast and Hawaii as the fleet was built back up. Because of this, Tucker wouldn't join the various raids on Japanese holdings. In fact, she only sailed out into the Pacific proper in April 1942 to escort the seaplane tender Wright on a reinforcement mission to American Samoa, and from there on to Fiji and New Caledonia. This was an important mission reinforcing the South Pacific holdings. Prior to Coral Sea in early May 1942, it seemed like the Japanese would move in that direction. Coral Sea did stop that, however, while Tucker was moored in Australia. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, Tucker would miss Coral Sea, and Midway, for that matter, having been moored in Fiji on June 4th, 1942. She would remain there through early July before taking convoy duty back up on July 10th. Nothing much happened at this point, with the destroyer back to her old duty. Tucker sailed up and down the South Pacific for the month of July, as in other areas, the planned counteroffensive built up. Tucker's role in what became the Guadalcanal Offensive would prove to be short-lived, and technically end before it could even begin. While moored in Fiji, she got orders to escort a transport, Naira Lukenbach, to Espiritu Santo. On August 1st, the two ships left Fiji. The voyage went well enough at first, but as Tucker escorted her charge into Espiritu Santo, she struck a mine on August 3rd. This was almost directly amidships with catastrophic effect. USS Tucker's back was broken around the number 1 funnel. 3 men were killed in the forward fire room as the ship nearly broke in two. As you can see here, while under tow, Tucker jackknifed. That the Navy tried to take her in tow at all is impressive in light of this, but at the same time, it would be a failure. The tug YP-346 tried to move Tucker to shallower waters, to beach the ship for salvage operation. Alas, during this process, Tucker's stern sank. The bow would be scuttled as well, with Tucker lost on August 4th, 1942. Fortunately, she only lost the 3 men in the initial explosion, by some sources. The Dictionary of American Naval Fighting Ships entry cites 3 more listed as missing. The saddest part about this story is that this was friendly fire. That minefield had been laid by American forces the day before Tucker arrived. Her captain had not been informed of this, so he had no idea what he was sailing into, leaving the destroyer a wreck on the bottom with her valuable equipment stripped off in short order. The remainder has long since been picked apart, leaving very little recognizable on the bottom today. A sad end, to say the least, and one that the Navy would soon regret as the Guadalcanal campaign kicked into high gear. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.